The chill clung to my coat like a second skin, a familiar companion from the university medical school cadaver storage facility. The air there was always a sterile, low hum, a constant reminder of the precise, unforgiving nature of the human machine. I'd been hunched over a section of calcified aorta, a particularly stubborn case of arterial plaque, when the call came. My gloves were still stained with the faint, waxy residue of formalin when the voice on the line cut through the quiet. "Reed, we've got a situation. Thorne's lab. Looks like a big one." I grunted, a sound of resignation more than annoyance. "Dr. Aris Thorne. The bioengineer. Brilliant, reclusive, and now, it seemed, a victim of his own genius." I stripped off my gloves, the sharp scent of disinfectant momentarily eclipsing the faint, sweet decay that permeated the facility. Another puzzle, another life reduced to fragments and questions. My mind, already shifting gears, began its familiar cataloging. What kind of lab? What kind of situation? The drive to the university's cutting-edge research complex was a blur of flashing lights and hushed urgency. The campus, usually a vibrant tapestry of students and academics, was now cordoned off, a stark perimeter of yellow tape fluttering in the pre-dawn breeze. The air, even outside the building, carried a faint, acrid tang, a metallic bite that spoke of heat and chemical reaction. This wasn't just a spill. "Reed, glad you're here." The lead investigator, a man whose patience wore thin faster than a cheap suit, met me at the entrance to Thorne's wing. His face was grim, etched with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from staring at something utterly catastrophic. "It's bad. Real bad. Looks like a pressure vessel blew. Or maybe something with the biotics. The internal security system barely held, but the lab itself is gone." He led me through a series of blast doors, each one a testament to the complex's security, now buckled and groaning on their hinges. The corridor beyond was a scene of controlled chaos. Technicians in hazmat suits moved with practiced efficiency, their breathing a rhythmic hiss. The air inside was thick, gritty, and the metallic tang was now laced with something sharper, something almost biological, an unsettling sweetness that made the back of my throat prickle. Initial assessment, the lead investigator continued, his voice low, looks like a tragic accident. Or, given Thorne's reputation for pushing boundaries, maybe a miscalculation. Some are even whispering suicide. He was under a lot of pressure, apparently, with this world-changing project of his. He gestured vaguely towards the wreckage that lay ahead. And wreckage it was. Thorne's state-of-the-art bioengineering lab, once a pristine temple of scientific advancement, was now a mangled nightmare of twisted metal, shattered glass, and scorched circuitry. A gaping hole marred one wall, leading to a blackened cavity. The smell here was potent, a cocktail of burnt plastic, ozone, and something else, something organic, almost meaty. My gaze swept across the devastation, taking in the scale of it. The sheer force required to achieve this level of destruction was immense. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on fragments of what were once precision instruments. A workstation, or what remained of it, lay inverted, its once smooth surface now pitted and blackened. A specialized incubator, designed for delicate cellular structures, was warped into an unrecognizable sculpture. "Where's Thorne?" I asked, my voice flat, already picturing the grim reality. The lead investigator pointed towards the epicenter, a crater in the floor where a large piece of equipment once stood. "Over there, or what's left." The blast radius was comprehensive. I nodded, my eyes already tracing lines, searching for patterns amidst the chaos. The official narrative was already forming: a brilliant mind, a dangerous experiment, a catastrophic failure. It was a clean, tragic story. But my job was never to accept the clean story. My job was to find the dirt, the anomaly, the single misplaced thread in an otherwise perfect weave. The heat from the explosion had been intense, charring surfaces, vaporizing materials. I knelt, ignoring the lead investigator's impatient sigh, and ran a gloved finger over a section of the scorched workbench. The carbonized residue flaked away, revealing the fainter, underlying scorch mark. Most of the damage was consistent with an internal explosion, radiating outwards from a central point. But then I saw it. On the underside of a fractured stainless steel panel, a section that had been flung upwards and landed inverted, there was a burn pattern that didn't quite fit. It was small, no bigger than my thumbnail, a perfectly circular char mark with a distinct, almost crystalline edge. It wasn't the ragged, diffuse charring of thermal expansion or a secondary ignition. This mark was focused, precise, as if something incredibly hot, yet contained, had been applied to that exact spot before the main explosion, or perhaps simultaneously but with a different mechanism. My thumb brushed against the edge of the mark. It felt subtly different from the surrounding carbon, almost vitrified. It was microscopic, easily missed in the larger tapestry of destruction, an anomaly that screamed at me from the heart of the devastation. The lead investigator was already moving on, talking to a uniformed officer about securing the perimeter. He saw a tragedy. I saw a question mark. A pressure vessel blowing up or a volatile chemical reaction wouldn't leave a mark like that. Not with that precision, that distinct edge. This wasn't a random byproduct of a larger event. This was something specific, something applied. And it was on the underside of a panel, protected from the direct blast. My gaze hardened. Suicide? An accident? The story was already faltering. This tiny, almost imperceptible detail, hidden amidst the carnage, whispered something far more sinister. Someone had been very careful to make this look like a disaster. But not careful enough. Misery twinged. I moved closer to what remained of Thorne's main workstation, careful not to disturb anything. The console was a melted sculpture of plastic and wires, but beneath its ruin, a faint, almost imperceptible detail snagged my attention. A scorch mark on the reinforced floor, no larger than my thumb, stood out against the broader charring. It was a perfect, almost geometric circle, darker, more intense than the surrounding damage, as if a pinpoint of extreme heat had been applied before the general conflagration. It didn't fit the narrative of a chaotic explosion. Explosions were messy, unpredictable. This mark suggested precision, control. It was a whisper of intent and a scream of destruction, and I already knew this case was going to be anything but simple. The preliminary autopsy report, delivered by the medical examiner in her perpetually cool office in the police department basement holding forensic samples, only deepened my skepticism. No defensive wounds, Reed, he reported, his voice dry as he flipped through the digital images. But the thermal damage. It's peculiar. The core temperature sustained by the body suggests a much higher, more focused energy release than the general lab temperature would indicate for the duration. She pointed to a detailed scan. See here? localized tissue necrosis, almost surgical in its precision, despite the overall widespread trauma. It's like he was hit directly by something incredibly hot, something contained, before the lab itself went up. So, not just a bystander to a general explosion? I asked, leaning forward. No. He was the focal point, or at least, a highly targeted element within the event. And there's this. She pushed a small, clear evidence bag across the table. Inside, nestled against a sterile cotton swab, my job was to find the dirt, the microscopic anomaly, the whisper of deceit beneath the scream of an accident. The lead investigator, a burly man named Aris, had already set his team to work. Their movements efficient, practiced. But efficiency often overlooked the subtle. I moved past the initial sweep, my gaze drawn to Thorne's workstation. The monitors were shattered, plastic shrapnel embedded in the adjacent wall, but the central processing unit, though scorched, seemed intact. Anything on Thorne's computers? I asked the junior technician hunched over a server rack. He shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose. Encrypted to hell and back. Proprietary system. We've got a team trying to brute force it, but it'll take time. He was a digital ghost. I knelt, ignoring the acrid smell of ozone and burnt wiring. The computer tower was heavy, its casing warped in places, but the hard drive bay looked surprisingly shielded. Thorne had built his fortress well, not just around his lab, but around his data. I ran a gloved finger along a hairline crack in the chassis. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge, darker than the surrounding soot, caught my eye. Not carbon, but something else. A residue. Let me take a crack at it, I told the technician. He looked skeptical but shrugged, moving aside. I didn't need to brute force. I needed to understand Thorne's mind. If he was brilliant enough to create this, he was brilliant enough to leave a back door, or a flaw, or a pattern. I powered up a forensic laptop, plugging into the scorched unit's auxiliary port. The system hummed, a low, struggling sigh. Hours bled into one another. The official team rotated out, leaving only a skeleton crew, Aris occasionally checking in, his patience wearing thin. I ignored him. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls, tracing digital breadcrumbs. Thorne hadn't left a back door, he'd simply left his fingerprint on the digital lock, a complex sequence of common key presses that, when combined, acted as a master override. A test of ingenuity, not brute force. The desktop bloomed, a stark contrast to the destruction around me. Folders were meticulously organized. Project Genesis was prominently displayed. I clicked, delving into a labyrinth of genetic sequences, protein structures, and complex biological pathways. It was dense, intricate work. Thorne wasn't just mapping genes, he was manipulating them, designing new ones. The applications were staggering: disease immunity, cellular regeneration, perhaps even directed evolution. Bioweaponry. The potential for either global salvation or global catastrophe pulsed from the data. Then I saw it. A series of access logs, deep within a hidden subdirectory. Recent activity. Not Thorne's usual login patterns. The timestamps were off, inconsistent. A ghost in the machine. And a specific set of files related to Genesis Phase 3, the most advanced, speculative part of his research, showed evidence of attempted deletion, Not a clean wipe, but a clumsy, hurried effort. Remnants lingered, fragments of data struggling to reconstitute themselves. Someone had been here, inside Thorne's digital sanctuary, and they had tried to erase a very specific past. And they'd been here after the initial explosion. I saved the compromised logs, the partially recovered files, and then shut down the system. Thorne hadn't just been killed, his work had been violated. A soft knock at the lab entrance drew my attention. She looked smaller, more fragile than I remembered from the preliminary interviews. Her usual sharp confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made her almost vibrate. "Of course," I said, my tone neutral. "Just a quick check of what you take out." I watched her, waiting. "Maya, I have to ask you about Dr. Thorne's recent work. Project Genesis. Did you notice anything unusual?" She flinched, her gaze darting to the ruined workstation, then back to me. "Unusual?" He was always intense, driven. Her fingers tightened on the satchel strap. But lately, he was jumpy, looking over his shoulder. He thought people were watching him. Watching him how? Not just the university. He said, outsiders. People who didn't understand the scope of his work. People who wanted to twist it. Her voice dropped even lower. He became very secretive. Started working odd hours, sometimes at a secondary location. Said he needed to be away from prying eyes. Did he ever mention this secondary location? I pressed, my mind already racing through possibilities. She hesitated, chewing on her lip. He only ever said it was a place where he could get specialized samples. Away from the main campus oversight. She paused, then, as if a dam had broken, she added, he mentioned the University Medical School cadaver storage facility once. Said it was quiet there. Nobody ever bothered him. She looked terrified, as if she'd betrayed a sacred trust. I nodded slowly. A place of quiet study, far from the corporate eyes and academic rivalries Thorne feared. A perfect secondary lab for someone trying to hide something, or someone trying to hide from something. And the attempted data wipe on Genesis Phase 3. It wasn't just about destroying evidence of a crime. It was about erasing the knowledge itself. I had to see what Thorne had been doing there. The dirt, I realized, was just beginning to surface. The colleague's words echoed in my mind, a persistent whisper of a lead to specialized samples. Away from the main campus oversight. It was enough to push me towards a location that felt unsettlingly appropriate for Thorne's reclusive work, yet entirely out of place for a bioengineer of his purported discipline. The air inside was a frigid, sterile blast, smelling faintly of formaldehyde and something else, a metallic tang that prickled my nostrils. Rows of stainless steel lockers lined the walls, each holding a silent, anonymous occupant. A lone attendant, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually hunched posture, acknowledged my badge with a curt nod before returning to his clipboard. I explained my purpose, the ongoing investigation into Thorne's death, and the need to verify his access records. The attendant's gaze flickered to a digital logbook. "Thorne," he rumbled, his voice low, "Yeah, he was here. Regular as clockwork for a while. Then he just stopped." He tapped a finger on the screen. "Last entry, 3 weeks ago. Said he was retrieving material for a private study. The way he said material suggested a deliberate vagueness, a professional detachment from the morbid reality of the place. I noted the date, a week before Thorne's demise. It confirmed his presence, but offered no further insight into what he was doing with specialized samples. The facility held no obvious signs of a struggle, no lingering scent of chemicals beyond its usual antiseptic pall. It was a dead end, for now, but it cemented Thorne's secretive nature. Back in my lab, the minuscule fragment I'd extracted from the blast site demanded my full attention. It was a sliver, barely visible to the naked eye, embedded in the scorched concrete near where Thorne's body had been found. My initial analysis had shown it was not a natural compound, nor was it part of Thorne's known experimental materials. It was alien to the scene, a foreign body. I loaded the fragment into the spectral analysis chamber, the hum of the machinery filling the quiet space. The instrument, a sophisticated piece of equipment designed to identify elements by their unique light signatures, whirred to life. On the monitor, a jagged graph began to form, peaks and valleys marking the presence of various elements. I watched, my jaw tight, as the system processed the data, cross-referencing against an exhaustive database of known substances. The results materialized slowly, lines of text scrolling across the screen. My eyes scanned for anomalies, for anything that didn't fit the profile of a standard lab environment. Then it appeared, a distinct signature for a complex, inorganic compound. The system flagged it immediately, a rare, synthetic polymer. Its composition pointed to high-end industrial applications, specifically in areas requiring extreme durability and resistance to chemical degradation. This wasn't something you'd find in a university lab, not even one as cutting-edge as Thorne's. This was a material designed for specialized manufacturing, for components that needed to withstand immense stress or corrosive environments. A knot tightened in my stomach. This trace element wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's research. It was an intrusion. It was a foreign signature, a piece of a puzzle from an entirely different game. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. If this polymer wasn't part of Thorne's work, then it had been brought into the lab. And if it was brought in, it pointed away from a tragic accident or suicide, and squarely towards a deliberate act. My mind immediately pivoted to the funding sources for Thorne's ambitious projects. Academic rivalries were one thing, but corporate interests were often far more ruthless. Omnicorp. The name surfaced instantly. They were a conglomerate with a long, aggressive history in research and development, known for acquiring promising technologies and, sometimes, for eliminating obstacles. They had heavily invested in Thorne's research, pouring significant capital into his groundbreaking work on bio-integrated robotics. I moved quickly, pulling up Omnicorp's public records, specifically their R&D divisions. It didn't take long to find patents and product specifications that referenced advanced synthetic polymers for their high-stress industrial machinery. The connection was too precise to be coincidence. The microscopic trace was a thread, and it led directly to their door. Securing an interview with an Omnicorp representative was surprisingly easy. Almost too easy. The corporate liaison, a man named Sterling, greeted me in a sleek, minimalist conference room, the city sprawling beneath us from the panoramic windows. He was impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Investigator Reed," Sterling began, extending a hand that felt cool and firm. were deeply saddened by Dr. Thorne's untimely passing. A brilliant mind, truly. Omnicorp valued his contributions immensely. I'm sure, I replied, my voice even. I'm looking into the circumstances surrounding his death. My investigation has led me to a unique material found at the scene, a synthetic polymer. It appears to be consistent with materials used in some of Omnicorp's specialized industrial applications. Sterling's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or caution, crossed his face. Indeed? Dr. Thorne's work was highly specialized. We provided funding, yes, but the day-to-day operations and material sourcing were entirely his purview. We wouldn't have supplied any raw materials directly for his biological research, certainly not industrial polymers. He paused, leaning forward slightly. However, Omnicorp does utilize a vast array of proprietary synthetic compounds across our various divisions. If you could provide specifics, I'd be happy to check our internal records for any overlap. The specific compound is a rare variant of a polyether-ether ketone, modified with a unique carbon nanotube matrix, I stated, watching him closely. He nodded slowly, as if digesting the information, though I suspected he already knew exactly what I was talking about. Ah, yes. Peak. Very durable. We use variations of that for our high-stress locomotive components, among other things. But again, investigator, that's far removed from biological engineering. His tone was smooth, almost reassuring. I assure you, Omnicorp adheres to the strictest ethical guidelines. We have no interest in interfering with a researcher's independent work, beyond ensuring the successful completion of the funded project. Of course. And what was the nature of Thorne's final project for Omnicorp? I pressed. It was a highly sensitive project. Sterling said, his eyes now sweeping over the skyline, avoiding my gaze. Proprietary bio-integrated systems. Potentially revolutionary, as you can imagine. We had high hopes. He turned back to me, his smile returning, a shade wider now. In fact, to show our full cooperation, I can arrange for you to speak with our head of R&D, if you wish. They might be able to shed more light on the general scope of Dr. Thorne's collaboration, though specific details remain confidential. His eagerness to offer further access, to appear so utterly transparent, felt like a well-rehearsed performance. It was too much, too soon. The overly cooperative act was a shield, designed to deflect suspicion by offering an illusion of openness. He was evasive about the specifics of the polymer's presence, yet eager to provide superficial access. That won't be necessary just yet, I said, rising from my seat. But I may take you up on that offer. As I left Omnicorp's gleaming tower, the tension in my shoulders hadn't eased. The trace element had opened a door, but Sterling had slammed a velvet curtain over it. Omnicorp was involved, deeply. The rare polymer was no accident. It was a signature, and it suggested a far more insidious plot than I had initially imagined, one woven into the very fabric of corporate ambition. The mystery had just grown significantly larger, and far more dangerous. The hum of the city traffic felt sharper, less a backdrop and more an insistent thrum against my skull as I navigated the evening commute. My mind replayed the sterile conversation with the Omnicorp executive, the way Sterling had deftly parried every probing question about the polymer. He'd given me nothing, but his defensiveness had spoken volumes. The trace element wasn't just a signature, it was a brand, and someone wanted it kept hidden. Lost in thought, I almost missed the sudden lurch. A beat-up panel van, its side emblazoned with a faded, generic logo, swerved without warning from the adjacent lane. It cut directly into my path, forcing me to stomp on the brakes. My tires shrieked, the anti-lock system juddering beneath my foot, and I braced for impact. The van's rear bumper, a rusty, dented slab, filled my windshield for a heart-stopping second. I swerved instinctively, narrowly avoiding a collision, the side mirror on my vehicle scraping against the van's paint with a sickening screech. The van didn't slow. It accelerated, merging back into its original lane as if nothing had happened, disappearing into the stream of taillights ahead. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white. My heart hammered, not from the near miss itself, but from the cold certainty that settled in my gut. That wasn't an accident. The maneuver had been too precise, too aggressive, the driver's complete lack of reaction too chilling. Someone had just tried to put me off the road. The incident was a stark, physical confirmation of the unease that had been building since I found that polymer. My lab, a converted industrial unit nestled between a defunct printing press and a textile warehouse, was my sanctuary. Its reinforced door, multiple locks, and internal alarm system usually gave me a sense of impregnable security. Tonight, that feeling was absent. The air inside was still, the way I'd left it. No broken windows, no forced entry. But a faint, metallic scent, like ozone mixed with something vaguely antiseptic, hung in the air, a smell that didn't belong. My gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail. The microscope, its lens cap usually nestled neatly beside it, was slightly askew. A tray of prepared slides, meticulously arranged by date, had one slide out of sequence. The tamper-evident seal, a thin strip of holographic tape, was intact. But a barely perceptible smudge marred its surface, a faint, almost invisible fingerprint that wasn't mine. Someone had been here. They hadn't taken anything obvious. They hadn't ransacked the place. They had been surgical, precise. They had looked at the polymer, perhaps even tried to open the box, then meticulously replaced everything to appear undisturbed. The message was clear: we know what you're looking at. We know where you keep it. The threats were escalating. They wanted me to back off. That meant I was close. I knew just the place that would have the specialized equipment and the necessary reference samples. The air, even in the administrative offices, carried a faint, clinical scent, a blend of formaldehyde and something earthy. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, past frosted glass doors, until I reached the restricted access zone. A stoic security officer, a woman with tired eyes and an unyielding posture, checked my credentials with a thoroughness that bordered on suspicion before granting me entry. Inside, the facility was a study in controlled preservation. Rows of stainless steel units, each humming softly, lined the walls of the main chamber. I wasn't here for the occupants, but for the specialized instrumentation housed in an adjacent analytical suite. I carefully loaded the minute fragment of the polymer I'd retrieved from Thorne's lab, then a control sample of common industrial polymers, and finally, a sliver of preserved tissue from the facility's archives. The data scrolled across the screen, a precise, intricate dance of peaks and troughs. The unique spectral signature of Thorne's polymer was unmistakable, and its interaction with the organic tissue sample was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was designed to integrate, to become one with the cellular structure, not merely interact. This wasn't just a material, it was an interface. The implications were staggering and dangerous. Later, back in my own lab, the metallic tang of the intruder still lingering, I called Maya. His voice was tight with apprehension when he answered. "Maya, it's Reed," I said, keeping my voice calm, professional. "I need to speak with you. Something important has come up, related to Thorne's lab." A pause stretched, thick with unspoken fear. Someone tried to run me off the road tonight. Someone broke into my lab. They're trying to stop me from finding out the truth about Thorne." The line was silent again, then a ragged breath. I saw things, before. Before it happened, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Things that didn't make sense. I didn't want to say anything. I was afraid. "What did you see, Maya?" I urged, my grip tightening on the phone. Late at night, she began, her words tumbling out faster now, as if a dam had broken. "A few times, in the weeks leading up to his death. I was working late, sometimes. I'd see a light on in the main lab, long after the professor had left. And the security logs. They always showed the lab was empty. I thought maybe I was imagining it, or it was a power surge, but I saw someone tall. Moving fast. They weren't supposed to be there. No one was. And the security officer, the one on the night shift, he always seemed distracted when I asked. He'd just wave it off. An unknown individual, I murmured, my mind racing, connecting her fragmented observations with the meticulously hidden polymer, the targeted accidents. Accessing the lab after hours, bypassing security protocols. Did you ever see their face? No, she said, her voice trembling. Always a hood, or they kept their back to me. But they were there, Reed. The hunt had just become personal. The flicker of the monitor screen was the only consistent light in the otherwise dim, sterile room. The security logs, initially scrubbed clean, had yielded under the relentless parsing of my forensic tools. It wasn't a simple deletion, but a sophisticated overwrite, a ghost in the machine designed to vanish without a trace. Yet, even ghosts leave echoes. These packets weren't external. They originated from within the facility's own network, routed through an obscure service port typically reserved for system diagnostics and environmental calibration. It was an access point only an insider would know, let alone exploit. The timestamp correlation with the lab's internal environmental control system was chillingly precise. I pulled up the schematics of Thorne's lab, overlaying them with the environmental data. The system, designed by Thorne himself, was a marvel of bespoke engineering, controlling everything from atmospheric composition to particulate count. The initial reports had focused on a sudden, uncontrolled pressure surge in the primary reactor, leading to a volatile atmospheric release. But the data I was looking at told a different story. It began subtly. A gradual, almost imperceptible reduction in the lab's oxygen levels, dropping by 0.5 percentage point every 30 seconds for 3 minutes. Not enough to trigger an alarm, not enough to cause immediate distress, but enough to prime the environment. Simultaneously, the internal humidity spiked, then plummeted, a rapid oscillation that stressed the air filtration membranes. This wasn't a malfunction, it was a deliberate, multi-stage manipulation. Thorne's research involved highly sensitive exothermic reactions, requiring meticulous temperature and pressure regulation. It was a change so minute, so incremental, that it would be dismissed as sensor drift by automated systems. But I knew better. These changes, initiated remotely through that diagnostic port, were designed to push the reactor past its critical threshold without triggering any preemptive safety protocols. The oxygen depletion and membrane stress would have exacerbated the internal pressure buildup, creating a volatile cocktail. Then came the final stage, the trigger. Exactly 3 minutes and 18 seconds after the initial atmospheric alteration, a single, encrypted command pulsed through the network. It bypassed the main control interface, directly targeting the reactor's emergency pressure relief valve. Instead of opening to vent, the command forced it to lock. The combination was devastatingly effective. A superheated, overpressurized reactor, an oxygen-depleted and stressed atmosphere, and a locked relief valve. The resulting explosion wouldn't just be catastrophic, it would be tailored to mimic an internal system failure, a tragic miscalculation by a brilliant mind pushing the boundaries. The burn patterns I'd noted, the way the blast had propagated, the specific residue on the internal surfaces, they all made sense now. They were the physical manifestation of this digital orchestration. The tension in my shoulders was a familiar ache. This wasn't a hack in the conventional sense. It was an intimate dance with Thorne's own creation, a precise exploitation of his bespoke systems and specific research protocols. The perpetrator hadn't just broken in, they had understood the very heartbeat of Thorne's work. This wasn't a random act, or even a brute force attack. This was a carefully engineered catastrophe, designed by someone who knew Thorne's lab as well as, if not better than, Thorne himself. The scope of the knowledge required was staggering, narrowing my suspect pool to a terrifyingly small number. The air, perpetually cool, carried the faint, clinical scent of disinfectant and something deeper, something I tried not to identify. It was a fitting place for a man trying to piece together the fragments of a dead man's life, surrounded by the quiet permanence of death. For days, I'd been sifting through Thorne's digital footprint, a digital archaeologist digging through layers of code and data. His research files were a labyrinth of brilliance, meticulously organized, yet frustratingly incomplete in their public-facing iterations. The official narrative, the one the corporation was pushing, was simple, a tragic accident, perhaps a suicidal act. But the microscopic burn patterns, the unusual residue I'd found in the lab, they screamed deliberate. They screamed precision. The problem wasn't how Thorne died, not anymore. It was why. The sheer complexity of the murder method, the intricate understanding of Thorne's lab and his work required to stage such a convincing accident, suggested a motive far beyond simple intellectual property theft. If the killer merely wanted Thorne's research, they could have taken the data and left him alive, or at least killed him in a less elaborate fashion. No, this was different. This wasn't about acquiring his work, it was about stopping it. Preventing its completion, or perhaps, its public release. I leaned back in the worn office chair, the plastic squeaking in protest. My gaze drifted across the monitor, a blur of file names and code. Thorne was a man of patterns, of logic. His digital life, like his physical lab, would have an underlying structure, even in its chaos. I scrolled through archived emails, project proposals, personal notes, anything that wasn't directly related to his primary research. I was looking for an anomaly, a whisper of something out of place. The hours bled into each other. My eyes ached, tracing lines of text. Then, a flicker. A subdirectory, nested deep within a seemingly innocuous system folder, caught my attention. It was named archive_log_x7. Nothing inherently suspicious, but its creation date was recent, just weeks before Thorne's death, and its size was disproportionately large for what its name implied. It was a subtle deviation from Thorne's otherwise impeccable organizational habits. He usually labeled archives with specific project codes or dates. This was generic, almost an afterthought. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I opened the directory. It was empty. Or so it appeared. My intuition, a cold knot in my gut, told me otherwise. Thorne wouldn't create a large, empty folder. I ran a deeper scan, bypassing the standard file explorer, using a command line interface to probe the directory's true contents. The raw data stream scrolled rapidly, then paused. A single, encrypted file appeared, hidden within the empty folder's metadata. Its name was a string of random characters, but the timestamp matched the directory's creation. This was it. My pulse quickened. Thorne, brilliant as he was, had left a breadcrumb. Not for the casual thief, but for someone with the patience and insight to look beyond the surface. I knew the encryption would be robust. Thorne was paranoid, and for good reason, it seemed. I spent the next hour working through it, using a combination of forensic tools and a few educated guesses based on Thorne's known preferences for secure communication. I tried common key phrases Thorne had used in his published papers, then more obscure references from his personal notes. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at me. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my back, pacing the small office. The hum of the cooling units seemed to mock my efforts. I stared at the blank screen, the encrypted file a digital wall. Then it hit me. Thorne's work wasn't just about his research, it was about his ethics. He was a man deeply concerned with the implications of his discoveries. I remembered a footnote in an early draft of a paper, a philosophical musing on the responsibility of creation. I returned to the keyboard, a new idea forming. I typed in a phrase, an obscure quote from a philosopher Thorne had often cited in his private journals, a quote about the moral imperative of knowledge. The screen flickered. A line of green text appeared, decryption successful. The file opened, revealing a series of dated entries, a personal log. This wasn't research data, it was Thorne's private thoughts, his anxieties, his growing unease. My eyes scanned the text, devouring the words. The implications of Project Chimera are horrifying. My initial work was meant for therapeutic application, for regeneration, not. This. Project Chimera. A new name. Omnicorp's funding for this parallel venture, separate from my own, is deeply troubling. They believe they can weaponize the core principles of cellular restructuring. They've gone too far. My discoveries, twisted into something monstrous. My breath hitched. Weaponization. Omnicorp. I cannot let this stand. I have gathered enough evidence to expose their clandestine funding of this separate, dangerous project. I intend to release these findings, along with my own ethical concerns, to the public within the month. The world needs to know. what they are truly building. The words hit me like a physical blow. Thorne wasn't just a victim, he was a whistleblower. The killer wasn't just after Thorne's work, they were protecting a secret so profound, so dangerous, that they were willing to orchestrate a murder of unparalleled complexity. And now, I held that secret. The game had just changed. The glow of the display cast a pale sheen across the scattered printouts on my desk. Hours had bled into each other since the last revelation, the weight of Thorne's true purpose pressing down on me. He wasn't just a casualty, he was a martyr. Now, the task was to find the executioner, the one who'd turned a brilliant mind into a silenced voice. I had compiled a comprehensive list, everyone with level 5 access to Thorne's lab, every technician with expertise in high-energy plasma containment systems, every security clearance holder whose biometric data registered within a specific timeframe around the incident. It was a digital haystack, but I was looking for a very specific needle. The first pass filtered by technical skill. The sabotage wasn't brute force, it was surgical, requiring intimate knowledge of the lab's proprietary systems. I cross-referenced the unique energy signatures I'd found with personnel training records. That cut the list from dozens to a mere 7 individuals. Next, I layered in access logs. Who was near Thorne's specific workstation within the critical window? Who had overridden minor security protocols in the days leading up to the incident? The system flagged a few anomalies, a maintenance log entry for a non-existent repair, a sensor calibration that was never completed. These weren't overt breaches, but subtle manipulations, the kind an insider would make. This reduced the list to 3. I pulled up their employee profiles, scrolling through each one, a senior research engineer, a lead safety compliance officer, and the Omnicorp liaison assigned to Thorne's project. The first 2 had impeccable records, years of dedicated service, no red flags beyond their proximity and expertise. Then I clicked on the third profile, David Thorne. No relation to Aris, the file explicitly stated, a detail that always struck me as unnecessarily prominent. His listed role was corporate oversight, facilitating communication between Aris Thorne's team and Omnicorp's executive board. Standard corporate fare. But as I dug deeper, past the public-facing resume, the picture began to shift. David Thorne, it turned out, hadn't always worn a corporate suit. His early career trajectory was a jagged line of specialized contracts, security consultancies, and a stint in what could only be described as covert asset protection for a major multinational. The details were sparse, heavily redacted in some public records, but the implications were clear. This wasn't just a corporate bean counter, this was someone with a background in operational security, counterintelligence, and, judging by the vague references, the strategic neutralization of threats. Then I found it. A buried article from a decade ago, detailing a high-profile industrial espionage case. A rival corporation had attempted to steal intellectual property related to advanced energy cell technology. The article mentioned a private security consultant who had been instrumental in recovering the stolen data and identifying the leak. The name wasn't explicitly stated in the body of the article, but a footnote in an archived legal brief, cross-referenced through a public domain patent filing, linked David Thorne to the investigation. He wasn't just involved, he was the architect of the counter-operation. He had a history of dealing with stolen intellectual property, not just recovering it, but understanding the mechanisms of its theft and protection. This wasn't just a suspect with motive, this was a professional.
Aris Thorne, the whistleblower, was undoubtedly seen as a massive liability to Omnicorp. And David Thorne, the liaison, was perfectly positioned. He had the access, the expertise, and the operational background to orchestrate a sophisticated murder and stage it as an accident. The meticulous, almost invisible sabotage, the precise timing, it all screamed professional. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. The pieces were locking into place with terrifying clarity. But I needed more than a profile and a hunch. I needed a tangible link, something that tied David Thorne's specific skills to the precise method of sabotage. The unique chemical residue I'd found, the one that degraded rapidly, leaving minimal trace, it pointed to a specific, almost artisanal application. My search led me to an obscure reference in a technical journal, detailing a rare form of bioreactive solvent used in highly specialized preservation techniques. The description matched the degradation pattern I'd observed. The journal cited research conducted at a facility known for its work with complex organic compounds and tissue preservation. I made the call, pulling favors, explaining only that I needed to examine a specific piece of equipment related to an industrial incident, something that had been moved off-site for independent analysis. The air was cool and still, carrying a faint, antiseptic tang, a stark contrast to the sterile but vibrant chaos of Thorne's lab. A facility staff member, a quiet man with kind eyes, led me past rows of stainless steel lockers, each one a silent testament to the impermanence of life. He stopped before a sealed, climate-controlled chamber, smaller than the main storage units. Inside sat a specialized environmental sensor array, one of many removed from Thorne's lab for post-incident review. This particular unit had been recording atmospheric composition and particulate matter. It was encased in a clear polymer shell, pristine and untouched since its transfer. "This is the one," the staff member said, his voice hushed. "It's been sealed since arrival, per your request." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the array. My objective wasn't the data it recorded, but something far more subtle. I activated a handheld spectrometer, running its beam across the polymer casing. The readout flickered, then stabilized. There, clinging to a minute fissure in the casing, a microscopic speck, almost invisible to the naked eye. It was the residue. The same bioreactive solvent, but in a concentration so minute it suggested an aerosolized application, designed to dissipate almost immediately after contact. This wasn't an accident. This was a targeted delivery, a precise application of a specific agent. And that required not just technical knowledge, but an operational precision, a covert touch. David Thorne. I had found my inside man. And he was far more dangerous than I had anticipated. I planted the seed with surgical precision. A casual conversation, loud enough to carry through the thin wall of the break room, about a significant development in Aris Thorne's polymer research. I spoke of a new, highly volatile compound, a derivative of Thorne's original work, capable of unprecedented energy absorption. I even hinted that a crucial, highly reactive sample was being discreetly transferred to a secure, off-site analysis point, a location chosen specifically for its low traffic and the unique environmental controls required for such sensitive material. The colleague I knew to be a conduit for information, a natural gossip, was already leaning in, pretending to scroll through his tablet. He swallowed the bait whole. My internal clock began its countdown. I knew the brother, Thorne's sibling, was monitoring my progress, scrutinizing every leaked detail. He had been too keen, too present, always just a step away from my investigations, feigning concern while subtly redirecting. This new breakthrough would be a direct threat to the narrative he'd meticulously crafted around Aris's death. If this new compound, supposedly derived from Aris's final project, were to be fully analyzed, it might reveal the true, weaponized nature of the polymer, unraveling his entire operation. He would have to act. I spent the next few hours meticulously preparing. My kit was lean, precise. A secure data reader, a high-resolution macro lens, and the evidence bag containing the microscopic polymer fragment I'd extracted from the casing in Aris's lab. That fragment, barely visible to the naked eye, was my linchpin. It was identical to the trace residue I'd found near the ruptured conduits in the utility corridor, the location of my own accident, a sudden, violent pressure surge that nearly crushed me. And it matched the residue from the structural failure in the ventilation shaft, another near miss I'd narrowly escaped. Someone had been trying to silence me, and they were using Aris's own materials to do it. The air grew colder the closer I got, a damp chill that seemed to cling to the old brickwork. Inside, the facility hummed with the low thrum of refrigeration units, a constant, mechanical sigh. The smell was distinct, a sharp, chemical tang underlying the faint, earthy scent of preservation. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, even glow across rows of stainless steel gurneys in shrouded forms, each an echo of a life ended. I didn't need to hide. My presence was part of the trap. I set up my equipment on a nearby dissection table, deliberately leaving the secure data reader open, displaying a fabricated analysis report on the new polymer derivative, its properties exaggerated to provoke a desperate response. The facility's security was minimal, relying on its inherent grimness to deter casual intruders. But the brother wasn't a casual intruder. Minutes stretched, each one tightening the knot in my gut. The silence was punctuated only by the distant drip of condensation and the rhythmic hum. Then, a faint click from the access door at the far end of the corridor. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoed on the polished concrete floor. His eyes, usually guarded, now darted around the cavernous room, settling on me, then on the glowing screen of my data reader. He carried a small, nondescript bag. My gaze dropped to his hands, they were gloved. I thought this facility was restricted. Just following a lead, I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the tension coiling within me. A potential breakthrough in Aris's research. Something I couldn't risk leaving in the main lab. I gestured vaguely at the screen. Highly reactive. Needs very specific, stable conditions. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing, scanning the details on the screen. I saw the flicker of recognition, then panic, in their depths. The fabricated data was convincing enough. He knew what Aris had truly been working on. That's impossible, he stammered, his facade beginning to crack. Aris was nowhere near developing anything like that. He moved. A sudden, swift motion, towards my setup, his gloved hand reaching for the data reader. I wouldn't, I said, my voice cutting through the sterile air. I lifted the evidence bag, holding it between us. Inside, the tiny polymer fragment glinted under the fluorescent lights. This, however, is very real. He froze, his hand hovering inches from the screen. His eyes fixed on the bag, then on my face. The carefully constructed mask of concern dissolved, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. That's just
A fragment of the polymer Aris used, he said, his voice regaining a fraction of its former control. The tremor was undeniable. Yes, I confirmed, stepping away from the table, putting distance between us. The same unique polymer found in the ruptured conduits that nearly crushed me. The same polymer found in the compromised ventilation shaft that almost suffocated me. And the same polymer, David, found clinging to a minute fissure in the casing of the data array in Aris's lab. I watched him, letting the name hang in the air. David. He flinched, a subtle tremor running through his frame. The silence stretched, heavy and cold, broken only by the hum of the refrigeration units. He looked around, as if searching for an escape route, but there was none. Just the rows of silent forms. The lab's security, intimately. The polymer was your signature. Your brother's signature, really. He let out a ragged breath, the fight draining from him. Omnicorp, he began, his voice barely audible, they tasked me. Aris. He was close to a breakthrough, yes, but not the kind you're pretending. He was developing a highly adaptable bioagent delivery system. A weapon. He realized what they intended to do with it, what they were already doing. He threatened to expose their entire bioweapon development program. Neutralize him, make it look like an accident, or they'd neutralize both of us. My family. My career. Everything would be destroyed. I had no choice, Reed. The air in the interrogation room had thickened to a suffocating density, heavy with the weight of the confession. The words, uttered by Thorne's own kin, still echoed in my ears, a chilling counterpoint to the hum of the ventilation system. David Thorne, stripped of his composure, sat across from me, his shoulders slumped, the carefully constructed facade of grief and innocence shattered. The lead detective, a woman with eyes that missed nothing, had already signaled to the uniformed officers waiting outside. I watched them take him away, the clink of the handcuffs a stark punctuation mark to the quiet dignity of the dead man we were avenging. David didn't resist. The truth, cold and stark, finally laid bare, but the feeling wasn't one of triumph. The next few hours blurred into a whirlwind of official statements, evidence logging, and terse conversations with federal agents who had been quietly orbiting the periphery of my investigation. The arrest of David Thorne was merely the tip of a much larger, more insidious iceberg. My initial suspicions, those microscopic traces and unusual burn patterns, had led not just to a killer, but to a sprawling network within Omnicorp itself. A federal investigator, a man with tired eyes and a suit that looked like it had seen too many late nights, pulled me aside. Your tragic accident was a corporate hit, Reed. Dr. Thorne's research. It wasn't just groundbreaking. Not just a brother's betrayal, but a calculated corporate conspiracy. The quiet dignity of Dr. Thorne's death had been a lie, orchestrated to protect profits and power. The media storm erupted almost immediately. News channels flashed headlines across their screens, digital articles spread like wildfire, exposing the rot within Omnicorp. High-profile arrests followed David Thorne's, a domino effect that sent shockwaves through the financial markets and academic circles. My face, or at least a blurry photograph of it, appeared on screens, next to pronouncements about meticulous forensic work. I hated the spotlight, the superficiality of it, when the reality was a man's life, brutally ended, and a family torn apart. The public outcry was immense. There were angry debates on talk shows,
impassioned editorials questioning the ethics of scientific advancement unchecked by corporate responsibility. The future of Dr. Thorne's research, the very thing that had cost him his life, became a geopolitical football. Governments and international organizations, once dismissive, now vied for control, their representatives circling like vultures, each claiming a moral imperative. It was a place of ultimate finality, where the human form was reduced to its intricate mechanics, stripped of identity, yet in its stillness, holding a profound truth. I requested access to the remains that had been identified as Dr. Thorne's, or what was left of them. A facility attendant, a quiet individual with a perpetually solemn expression, granted it without question, understanding the nature of my work. The sheet was pulled back, revealing the familiar, grisly evidence of the catastrophic event. I leaned in close, my breath misting in the cold air. Now, with David Thorne's confession echoing in my mind, every detail, every minute burn, every fractured bone, spoke a different language. The initial assessment had been skewed by the assumption of accident. Now, I saw the deliberate placement, the precise force, the calculated staging. My gaze drifted to a specific area on the remains, a subtle, almost imperceptible discoloration that I had dismissed as incidental damage during the first chaotic examination. It was a minor detail, but now, it screamed. It wasn't random, it was consistent with a specific type of contact, a last, desperate struggle, a signature of the killer's proximity. I traced the outline of the injury with a gloved finger, the cold metal of the table against my palm. The truth, as brutal as it was, settled deep within me. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was an execution, meticulously planned, ruthlessly carried out, and covered up with a sophisticated understanding of both forensic science and Dr. Thorne's own groundbreaking work. The scale of the deception, the layers of corporate greed, and the sheer audacity of the killer left a bitter taste. The immediate crisis of David Thorne's apprehension was over, but the wider implications, the moral and ethical quagmire, had only just begun. It was a sterile, hushed world, starkly lit by fluorescent panels that cast long, unwavering shadows. The faint, clinical scent of preservative hung heavy, a smell that always grounded me, reminding me of the raw, material truth beneath every human story. I wasn't there for a new case, not directly, but for a quiet, final visit, a pilgrimage of sorts, to the place where the physical reality of our existence was laid bare. The media storm had raged, just as I'd known it would, tearing through the corporate facade like a wildfire. The CEO and his brother, a man whose ambition had eclipsed any familial bond, were facing a barrage of charges. The carefully constructed narrative of a tragic accident, of Thorne's solitary demise, had crumbled under the relentless weight of what we'd unearthed. My own exhaustion was a deep-seated ache, a companion I'd grown accustomed to in the weeks since the truth had broken. I'd seen the ugly underbelly of humanity countless times, but this felt different. It wasn't just a simple murder, it was a perversion of scientific pursuit, a ruthless silencing of a mind whose work threatened to disrupt a carefully balanced ecosystem of power and profit. I walked slowly between the silent rows, each unit a testament to a life lived, now reduced to a lesson. Dr. Thorne, with his groundbreaking research, had inadvertently stumbled onto something so valuable, so potentially transformative, that it became his death warrant. His innovation had been seen not as a boon to humanity, but as a corporate liability, a threat to established order. That, I realized, was the true reveal of the case, not merely who killed him, but the profound, terrifying implications of why. It exposed a moral vacuum at the heart of certain scientific advancements, where the pursuit of knowledge collided violently with unchecked greed.
Thorne's legacy, I knew, would be forever tainted by the manner of his death, a cautionary tale whispered in university halls and corporate boardrooms. He had sought to push the boundaries of what was possible, and in doing so, had exposed the dangerous fragility of those very boundaries. I stopped at the far end of the room, looking out over the sterile expanse. This job, my commitment to it, felt heavier than ever. But it also reaffirmed my purpose. Someone had to sift through the fragments, piece together the narrative, and speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. That was me. That was Reed. The Thorne case was closed. The official reports were filed, the convictions secured, the media cycle already moving on to the next sensation. There was a quiet dignity now, a measure of justice restored to Thorne's memory, even if the world would never fully grasp the depth of the conspiracy that had claimed him. But the questions lingered, a persistent hum in my consciousness. Where did ambition become hubris? At what point did scientific progress cross the line into perilous exploitation? A new file, a new address, a preliminary report hinting at complexities I hadn't yet begun to imagine. The world kept turning, and with it, the relentless tide of human fallibility and malice. The low thrum of the facility faded behind me as I walked out, the next puzzle already beginning to form in the quiet corners of my mind.